Claude Code subagents are useful only when the delegation is narrow, logged, and reviewable. That is the answer. My thesis is simple. Claude Code subagents are only worth using when each subagent has a narrow role, isolated context, and a verifiable receipt of work. If you treat them like autonomous geniuses, you get noisy orchestration, burned context, and fake confidence. If you treat them like explicit workers with boundaries, they become practical. So this is not a magic helper pitch. It is a workflow for Claude Code agents subagents that you can inspect after the run. Anthropic's docs explain the feature. I'm doing the tactical teardown more in the indie dev Dan lane: constraints, logs, and handoff boundaries. The question is not, can Claude delegate? The question is whether you can prove what it delegated, why, and whether the result deserves to survive code review. First, Claude Code enables subagents. The exact toggle can move by version, so verify in your current release, but the principle does not change. Do not assume subagents are active just because the marketing page says they exist. I want a receipt showing they are enabled and actually invoked in a live session. If I do not see terminal output proving the parent agent handed work to a subagent, I assume I am still in single agent mode, and the rest of the demo is theater. That matters because the first failure mode is embarrassingly common. People think they are testing subagents, but they are just watching one large agent talk to itself in a different tone. Then, they make orchestration claims with no proof. I would not accept that in a repo, and I would not trust it in a tutorial. Receipts first, claims second. Now for Claude Code custom subagents. A custom subagent is just a deliberately constrained worker definition, usually backed by a YAML file that says what this role is allowed to do and what it is supposed to care about. The YAML should contain a role, a scope, and tool permissions at minimum. That is the center of Claude Code subagent YAML, and if those three fields are vague, the subagent will be vague too. Here is the structure I actually like. The role should be narrow, like test writer or migration reviewer, not senior software architect of destiny. The scope should define where it can operate, ideally a bounded slice of the repo or a bounded class of task. Tool permissions should be strict enough that the agent cannot wander into unrelated files or call tools it does not need. Claude Code is strong for scoped delegation if you inspect the logs. Claude Code subagents are useful when roles are narrow and noisy when over-orchestrated. That distinction matters. This is the practical answer to Claude Code subagents orchestration and Claude Code subagent architecture. The parent agent should own planning, sequencing, and final synthesis. The subagent should own one bounded task with isolated context so it does not pollute the main thread. That isolation is the real benefit. You are saving attention and context budget, not summoning a committee. Kolmodin's PRP framing is useful on the input side. Give the worker clean constraints. On the output side, I want the same discipline in reverse. Did the test writing subagent stay in the tests directory? Did the refactor subagent touch only the intended module? If I cannot answer that quickly from logs and diffs, the architecture is already too fuzzy to trust. Next, Claude Code subagent logs. This is where most of the value shows up. I want agent log output that proves which subagent handled which task, with enough detail to connect the handoff to a concrete file change or test run. If the log shows the parent delegated test creation to a test subagent and later delegated docs cleanup to a docs subagent, good. If the log is ambiguous, I assume the orchestration is ambiguous too. This also answers, how do custom subagents work in Claude Code? They work by narrowing authority and producing a trace. A subagent is not valuable because it sounds specialized. It is valuable because the logs show a specialization boundary that held up under execution. The difference is subtle until you review a messy repo, and then it becomes painfully obvious. After logs, I want the final receipt, a git diff. The diff should show work split between the parent agent and the subagent in a way a human reviewer can actually reason about. This is where Claude Code agents, subagents, stops being a feature demo and becomes engineering. If the subagent touched unrelated configuration, rewrote imports across the app, and snuck in style churn, I do not care how smart the orchestration looked on screen. I care that the output is sloppy. This is also why I rank stacks differently than most demos. I prefer a boring, inspectable codebase over next.js for teaching orchestration. My named tool take is blunt. Next.js is a bad default demo stack for teaching orchestration, clearly, because the framework adds too much incidental movement when you are trying to show delegation boundaries. For this topic, I want plain Node, a simple package layout, and tests that make the subagent's contribution obvious in the diff. Now the obvious question. When should you use nested subagents versus a single agent? Usually, you should not. I would not build a nested subagent tree for routine coding tasks just because the demo looks clever. A parent plus one narrowly scoped subagent is enough for most repo work. Tests, documentation, migration notes, or a bounded refactor review. Once subagents start spawning subagents for everyday work, you are paying orchestration overhead to impress yourself. Here is where this breaks in practice. Delegation gets sloppy when roles overlap, when scope is not pinned to files or tasks, or when the parent agent does not clearly own final synthesis. Then you see duplicated edits, contradictory changes, or a subagent confidently modifying the wrong layer. I have hit versions of this pattern enough times that I treat nested delegation as suspect by default. If I cannot predict the handoff from the YAML, the run will usually confirm that suspicion. So the practical workflow is short. Enable subagents and verify that with terminal output. Define one custom subagent in YAML with a narrow role, a real scope, and explicit tool permissions. Run a task where isolation helps. Inspect the logs to confirm which agent did what, and then review the git diff like you would review a human junior developer's PR. That is the operating model. My final opinion is ranked, not vague. Claude Code over ad hoc multi-agent wrappers for this use case, because the integrated logs and project local workflow make review easier. Claude Code subagents over a single giant prompt only when you need isolated context and a clean receipt trail. Single agent over nested subagents for ordinary coding work, because simplicity survives contact with production far better than orchestration theater. Recap. Claude Code subagents are worth using when the subagent has a narrow role, isolated context, and a receipt you can inspect in logs and diffs. Enable them deliberately, define them in YAML, verify the delegation in logs, and review the final diff like a skeptic. Receipts are in the description. If you want more of this multi-agent orchestration work without the hype layer, that is what this channel is for.